It's a great pleasure to welcome up from Gisborne District Council, Joe Noble, who's the Strategic Planning Manager. So a big hand for Joe, please. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. So I am Joe Noble. I am the manager of the Strategic Planning team at Gisborne District Council. I am fairly new to the team, so I'm new to Gisborne. I've been here for about a year and a half, and I've been leading the strategic planning team for about 6.5 months. I'm not new to resource management, though. I've been working in this field for about 15 years. I did start my career in the UK, but I've been living in Aotearoa for just over 16 years now. And it's wonderful to have this opportunity, not just to come and talk to you, but to listen to the ideas, the thoughts from this morning were really provoking. And the spatial plan for Tairāwhiti 2050, is just, I suppose, a small part of where we can start to move towards a circular economy. I think one of the speakers made a comment about, I think it was the Sustainable Business Network, that they spoke to a lot of their industries and they thought, yep, we've got this circular economy thing down, we know what we're doing. So I think as Gisborne District Council, we know we don't. We're at the beginning of our journey and figuring out what it means for us and the role that we can play. So I'm going to explain both our spatial planning project and start to explore what role council can have to play in a circular economy. So one of our big projects for this year has been Tairāwhiti 2050, the spatial plan, really shaping the future of Tairāwhiti for the next 30 years. So a question we get asked a lot is, what is this spatial plan thing you keep talking about? We have more plans than we know what to do with, and it's just going to sit on a shelf. Why are you doing another plan? So really, we want to set out a long-term and integrated strategy for the region. So we're looking at least 30 years out, so that can then inform not just the work that we do as a council, but the decisions that other people make, whether they're already living in Tairāwhiti, investing in Tairāwhiti, could be central government deciding what projects they do or don't put their money into. And it's a plan that's integrated across a range of themes, and it really sets that direction for investment, development, and protection and restoration, and where activities are going to occur across Tairāwhiti. And we want to be as collaborative as we can be. Council doesn't always do the best job at that, but we are trying, we're moving in the right direction. So it's not just a plan for us, for council, it's a plan for our community, our tanata whenua, and our industries and our businesses and all our stakeholders. So why bother doing a spatial plan is another question we get asked. So we have our long-term plan, that sort of has a 10-year outlook, but it really largely focuses on balancing our budget. Where's our money going to come from? So what rates are we going to get in? And then what are we going to spend that money on? So what we're looking for is to set a bigger picture strategy that can then inform both the next long-term plan and the plan after that. And we redo these every 3 years. So it's really useful to have an overarching strategic view that we've already talked to the community about. We know where people want Tairāwhiti to go. And we can check in and refresh that, and then it guides both our long-term plan, also our Resource Management Act plans. Those of you who work with a Tairāwhiti Resource Management Plan will know that it does need redoing, relooking, refreshing. It is getting quite old now. So this spatial plan will provide a real strong platform for the review of our Tairāwhiti Resource Management Plan. We're also hoping that the spatial plan is going to form a really strong platform for us to build some better relationships throughout our community with tanata whenua and with those people who invest in Tairāwhiti. It's going to help us as a council decide what we spend our money on, what infrastructure we do or don't support, what investment we put into community facilities. And hopefully it's also going to identify what needs to be protected. What do people really value about Tairāwhiti? What do we need to make sure we don't lose sight of as we move forward over the next 30 years? And where is there room for improvement? And also it's a way to help communities, help us shape our places so that they are resilient and that they are thriving and that they will endure for the next 30 years and beyond. And this is where obviously the circular economy concept can start to become really important. So we are looking at the whole region. We're not just looking at the city centre. We're not just looking at the Poverty Bay Flats. It's the whole of Tairāwhiti, and also where Tairāwhiti fits within Aotearoa and maybe the world. So we've just divided our project up into 7 sort of key themes, but they do all interrelate and overlap. We can't look at anything in isolation. So we've got settlement patterns, that's about where people live, the type of houses and communities they live in, where those are going to be. Do we need to change the current urban growth, for example? Sustainable land use. I think this has been touched on already in some of the earlier presentations, but we do have a lot of monoculture in some parts of our region. For example, we have a lot of pine forest. Is that the sustainable land use that we want to see occurring in the future? Is it in the right place? What more can we be doing? Are there other opportunities? Thriving economy. So by that, we want a type of economy that everyone benefits from, so an inclusive economy and one that's sustainable. And maybe this is another area where we can start to embrace the circular economy too. Connections are important. Connections of people to place, connections via transport, connections via the digital age. People need to feel connected to each other and to their land. We also want and need our communities to be resilient. We know we face a number of natural hazards here in Tairāwhiti, earthquakes, tsunami, flooding, and the list goes on. And then with the effects of climate change, that's going to be exacerbated. You know, we have lots of settlements, lots of infrastructure along the coast. We're a coastal region in many aspects, and with rising sea level, our communities become more vulnerable to the impacts of sea level rise, for example. Protecting what we value. We have amazing natural resources, cultural resource, historic heritage in Tairāwhiti. We have nationally significant surf breaks. We have marine biodiversity. We have 1 marine reserve. We have lost a lot of what people value too. So it's really being clear about what we as Tairāwhiti want to protect, what we want to keep and celebrate and restore. And then last, but by no means least, tangata whenua, and obviously that weaves its way throughout all the other themes too, and there was a lot of debate about whether there should be a separate theme or whether that should be so inherent within the spatial plan that it doesn't need a standalone aspect. But we really need to work with our tangata whenua to understand what their needs and aspirations are. We have a huge amount of Māori land in our region. I think it's 22%, but if in some parts, if you go up sort of towards the north, it's more like 40 to 50%. How can we as a council help facilitate, enable Māori to meet their aspirations for that land? What are we currently doing that gets in the way? So there are some really big questions that face us as Tairāwhiti, but also the rest of New Zealand, if not the world. I've touched on many of them already, so climate change and natural hazards, the loss of our natural resources, whether that be biodiversity, our natural landscapes, our fresh water, the availability and the quality of that fresh water. We are experiencing some intense pressure on the Poverty Bay Flats, which is our large horticultural area in Tairāwhiti. There's changing technology, so that can be an opportunity or that can be seen as a threat. How are we going to respond to that? We do have population growth in our city that's occurring now and is predicted to continue for the next sort of 20 to 30 years. Where are these people going to live that are coming to Tairāwhiti? How do we want our city to be shaped? Sustainable townships. We have a number of smaller townships up the east coast and inland. If we look at the population predictions, which are just predictions and they look forward by looking back, those populations are predicted to show a gradual decline. Is that what we want to see happen in Tairāwhiti? And what can we do to change that round if that's what people want to see, and to keep our townships connected throughout the region and resilient? Efficient transportation, so that's a biggie for Tairāwhiti. We are quite isolated. We need to be able to move goods and people around the region. Waste management is also an issue for us. Obviously, we generate waste products. Circular economy approach may reduce that waste generation, but a lot of it gets shipped out of the region. Is that the best, most efficient use of that resource. And lastly, regional economic development. So there's lots of aspects we're looking at. It is a big project, a big kaupapa. So what will the spatial plan do? So it will include maps. It will be a visual illustration of the strategic direction for Tairāwhiti. And it will do things like identify constraints or bottom lines. There's many different ways you can term that. So, for example, and these are just examples up here, lands and assets vulnerable to climate change, or important values for protection and restoration. But it's also about looking to the future and being positive. So what are the opportunities? Can we support residential development? Where can we support residential development? Where should that go? What are the opportunities to enhance and revitalise the central business district here in Gisborne? How can we diversify and strengthen our regional economy? What could that look like? Where could we focus our efforts on restoring biodiversity? How can we support rural township development and development of Māori land? And how can we, as a council and other infrastructure providers, deliver more efficient core infrastructure and other activities? And how can we optimise and enhance our regional transport network? So they're just examples, as I said, of the types of things we're looking at and we want to talk to the community about. This is another slide that tries to put everything in context, based on some really good thinking from one of our councillors, Councillor Amber Dunn, who I believe is here today. Kia ora. So at the heart of everything is our natural environment, our natural resources, our land, our fresh water, the sea. Everything comes from that. So that's at the core. And then next we have our cultural environment, if you will, our people and their values and what they want to see happen. And then from that we have our core infrastructure, stormwater, wastewater, roading, energy, communications. These are the things that people have evolved to need and want. And then on top of that, we have the service infrastructure. So things like community facilities, resource management planning. And then over the top of everything is our social infrastructure. So really, maintaining and keeping our natural resources are the key to everything. Once they're lost, then everything else starts to fall apart. So we have some big questions as a region. As a region, how do we become more resilient? How do we provide prosperity for all and not just for one or two individuals? And how do we keep that prosperity within our region and maybe not disappearing offshore? How do we become more sustainable? And what can we as a council and others do to support these goals? And how do we really design and make our place? How do we shape Tairāwhiti for the next 30 years and beyond? So segueing from that into how does the circular economy concept fit within those big questions that we're asking ourselves and also the work that the council does? And do we as a council have a role in the circular economy? So as I said, we're really at the beginning as a council on understanding more about the circular economy concept and how it fits in with what we do, both on a day-to-day business and our bigger picture strategic thinking. But one thing that seemed quite obvious to us was the whole circular economy concept could be at least a part of the solution to some of those big questions. If we design out waste and pollution, if we keep those products and materials in use and we help regenerate our natural systems, then that goes a long way to building a thriving, resilient, and a livable region. So the current linear sort of model of take, make, waste, that has an impact on council, both in financial terms, so the cost to council, which then become the cost to the ratepayer, solid and liquid waste management, just as a really obvious example. The more waste that's produced in the region, the more waste we have to dispose of. And there is a cost associated with that. Not just, there's an economic cost, but also an environmental cost, a cultural cost, a social cost. There's other issues, remediating contaminated sites, for example. Once you've polluted an area, to be able to reuse that land needs remediation. That can cost millions of dollars, and then there's also other costs associated with that contamination. The Local Government Act, the 4 well-beings are very nearly back into the Local Government Act, so they were removed under the last government, but now it's nearly through Parliament, the bill that will reintroduce the 4 well-beings, so social, cultural, environmental and economic. So local government clearly has a role to play in those well-beings. So also associated with the take, make, waste model, there are social and economic costs, inability to access fresh water, for example. If all the fresh water's been used or it's all been polluted, then it's lost. Underutilised buildings. If you look around our central business district at the moment, you'll see there are a number of buildings, areas of land that are not being used to their fullest potential. There are health costs associated with this model. Air pollution, noise pollution, that impacts people's health. There are cultural costs. We have unacceptable waste disposal methods. I'm thinking, for example, of our wastewater disposal at the moment that's going out into the Moana. And when our infrastructure can't cope, we get overflows into our fresh water too. And there are environmental costs. Our natural resources become depleted. And then looking sort of wider, we also have limited climate change mitigation options when we're sort of living at the very edge, if not beyond, what our natural resources can provide for us. So then I started thinking about, well, what role could local government play in this circular economy concept? So we, particularly in the strategic planning team, we set the vision, we set the direction, for example, in our spatial plan. So we can include circular economy within those strategic planning documents, provided that we have the mandate from our community, from our tāngata whenua, and that we can get our governors on board too. We set regulatory frameworks, so we can set conditions that either enable the shift to a circular economy or make it harder. So that's another important aspect we can look at. So there's not just the Resource Management Act plans, but we also have bylaws as well, for example. Procurement. As a council, we buy a lot of goods and services, so we can look at how we include criteria in our procurement policies that fit with the circular economy concept. We are a service delivery provider as well. We provide waste management services, although we contract them to other providers. We're responsible for those contracts. Roading is also a big part of our service delivery, so we can incorporate circular economy concepts within that service delivery too. We can also help support, learn from, celebrate exemplar projects. And I noted that Tina Parau sent a very strong message that Māori have been living this exemplar for years, and they're the type of opportunities that we can live and learn from, particularly in Tairāwhiti. So now moving on to just a couple of more specific examples. So we've had some work done recently looking at the central business district in Tairāwhiti. Those of you from Tairāwhiti will know that there are many underutilised empty buildings. We have quite a large CBD, so it's 82 hectares. That equates to about 450 hectares per person. If you look at other sort of similar sized regional centres to ours, that's a huge CBD for our region. For example, Invercargill, also quite large, 590 hectares per person. Taupo, 600 hectares, 600 people per hectare. Rotorua, 1,025 people per hectare. And then Auckland, which is at the other extreme, is 3,600 people per hectare. So we have a big, sprawling CBD. There's an opportunity to revisit that, revision what we want our CBD to be. Also with the changing face of retail, for example. Many people buy online now. We need to look at different ways of doing things to bring our CBD back to life. So we have an opportunity to look at higher density development for more mixed use, bringing residential into the CBD, clustering activities, and that will sort of reduce, removing the need to bring your car into the CBD as well, reducing car parking requirements. So we end up with improved access, we're reducing our resource and energy demand, clustering activities like with like, there may be potential economies of scale. Overall, doing more with less. Then thinking about some of the assets that council manages. So these figures are taken from our infrastructure strategy. And it just sets out some of the book value of our infrastructure. And then there's the pie chart there. Really the key message is that a big bulk of our infrastructure is roading. That's 70% there. So there's a significant cost that comes with maintaining that roading and upgrading that roading. So if we can start to look at things in a different way, we may be able to reduce the cost that we as a council and in turn our community bears in terms of maintaining that huge roading network and then our other infrastructure as well. So I just had some facts here from the OECD that said in the EU countries, about 70% of public investment is spent on maintenance costs associated with past infrastructure decisions. So the decisions we make now about where to put infrastructure and the type of infrastructure to build has a huge impact on our future generations. So then, as we do in councils, we look to other examples and see what's happening elsewhere. So in Auckland, they've gone through a spatial planning exercise. In fact, they've gone through it twice now already. And they are required to have a spatial plan by legislation. So they've started to look at the circular economy too in their spatial planning. And they've actually had some work done looking at what could be the benefits to Auckland in financial terms, aside from all the other wealth of benefits that have already been touched on by others. And some economic consultants calculated that it could result in a 6.3 to 8.8 billion benefit to the Auckland economy by transitioning to more of a circular economy approach. There were some key sectors that they could see that being derived from, which related to construction, food waste, and transport. I know we have other focuses for the conference here, sort of wood waste, water. So our profile may look different in where we can make the biggest gains in terms of moving towards a circular economy. Thank you. So we need your help. If this is something you want to see happen, then we need to know. We need you to let us know, let your councillors know. Tell us what's already happening, tell us what you think needs to happen, and how can council support your aspirations, whether that be for a circular economy or something else. And what do we need to stop doing? How are we getting in the way? And where can we as a council work with you to make the change you want to see happen? And we've started some engagement. It's been fairly targeted to date. We are building on the engagement, so it's been a bit of a snowball approach. So when you get the phone call or the email or the letter saying, hey, do you want to talk to us about the spatial plan, please say yes. Or if it's not you, tell us who we do need to talk to. We also have a website, Shape Tairāwhiti. I'll just flick it up so you know what it looks like. You can also go on there, and under each theme, you can actually submit feedback from now. And there's also an email address that you can use. And I will also just say there were some questions about how do we get involved, how do we make a change. Local government elections are coming up in October, so if you want to be the change, that is one way, stand for your local ward. You know, some of our local wards, the elections were uncontested last time round, so that's one way you can make a difference, and also vote. Thank you very much.